questions. The other thing is just to say that just for reasons of time, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves as they speak rather than me spend time going through that. But I better just briefly say who I am. So I'm Dr. Matt Frost. I head up the international office for Plymouth Marine Laboratory, but I also wear lots of hats. I'm actually here with the IOC because I chair the UK's National Decade Committee. I won't go through all the other hats I wear because it would use up valuable time when we want to be listening to our speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to thank all our speakers for being here on time. You'll notice there's one gap. There's one speaker at another event, and I'm sure she will be here by the time it's her time to speak. Well, we hope anyway. So, as I said, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker now to kick off the event. And our first speaker is Niall Adair, who is Co-facilitator of the UNFCCC Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue, and also a Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategy Policy at Fisheries and Oceans Canada. I hope I got that all correct. Niall, if you've explained, that's great, thank you.
You did. Thank you. Great to be here with you all, and thanks for taking care of the introduction, so I won't repeat that. I'm honored to be here as one of the co-facilitators. I will note that Julio Cordano of Chile is my counterpart, also with leading the negotiating delegation for Chile. So really pleased to be able to work with him on that. As folks in this room may know, the Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue was established in 2019 under the UNFCCC with the intention of providing a specific forum for enhancing the understanding of and action on how we collectively shape the future of our oceans and their consideration in the fight against climate change. I was delighted to be able to co-facilitate the latest dialogue, which took place in June 2023, and focused on two topics: ecosystem restoration, including blue carbon, and fisheries and food security. The dialogue outlined some of the key challenges that we face in this space, but it also identified opportunities for increased collective action that I'd like to share with you, especially in areas addressing gaps in scientific research and modifying governance frameworks to better support capacity building. One thing that was communicated loud and clear throughout this year's dialogue, and something that I'm sure will resonate with you all here today, is that there remain significant knowledge gaps which are preventing ocean considerations from being more widely considered in UNFCCC processes, including in particular nationally determined contributions. There's a need to improve our understanding of carbon cycling to support science-based decision-making, including through increased ocean-based systematic observation and strengthened research and data management. And standardized data and knowledge systems are essential to achieve this, and must be communicated, coordinated, and openly shared among national and international agencies. Integrating mitigation and adaptation action for coastal ecosystems into policies and management practices at the national and regional levels, including in nationally determined contributions and in national adaptation plans, is a vital way for governments to signal the priority that they place on these issues and on the ocean, and to mobilize finance into that space. It's also important to better streamline national focus areas with other international conventions and agreements so that the work that happens under the UNFCCC can be linked to existing commitments under the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework and many others. During the dialogue, we heard that it's essential for parties to strengthen blue carbon accounting methodologies and tools. Natural capital accounting, ecosystem mapping, and robust indicators are all things that need to be advanced to support ocean-based climate action, monitoring, and evaluation. Sustainable management of coastal ecosystems requires building awareness and advancing a data-driven approach to demonstrate and quantify those benefits. Assessment of blue carbon storage, ocean acidification, and conducting impact assessments, including for carbon dioxide removal technologies, requires further observation and research. Another key message was that partnerships, strengthened regulatory frameworks, and an inclusive whole-of-society approach that includes Indigenous peoples and local communities and other highly affected groups, including youth and women, as well as the private sector, are essential for the development and effective implementation of climate policies in the ocean space. So that means co-design and co-implementation of projects, addressing policy barriers, facilitating investments, and communicating co-benefits are all critical. Indigenous peoples and coastal communities must be involved early on and throughout project development and implementation to build trust and ensure the integration of Indigenous knowledge systems and local practices with science and policy while applying rights-based approaches. We heard that enhanced, upscaled, stable, and accessible finance is needed to ensure sustained implementation of ocean-based actions under both focal topics, both fisheries and blue carbon, and that there's a need to de-risk investments in the ocean climate space through long-term finance, through conducting cost-benefit analyses, through diverse investment schemes, and by establishing clear policies and regulations. Removing barriers to accessing funding, capacity building, and promoting skills development are also vital, particularly for developing countries and communities with less capacity. The dialogue also highlighted that there's a need to break down silos and foster greater cross-collaboration among broad networks of policymakers, of experts, international organizations and institutions, as well as the private sector, in order to increase alignment, critically reduce duplication, and uncover new opportunities to ensure effective ocean-based climate solutions are implemented. Events such as these really do give us a valuable opportunity to enhance that alignment and to connect organizations and states that share a common sense of urgency, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that from panelists across this committee today. As part of the Ocean Climate Dialogue, we'll continue to seek views, experiences, and recommendations from observers, experts, speakers, panelists, moderators, and of course parties who are helping to advance discussions, challenge the status quo, and remove barriers, and importantly, drive action on the ground. I'd invite you to get involved in the upcoming dialogue, which will take place in Bonn this June, and I look forward to working with you to advance work at the Ocean Science Policy Nexus in the context of the UNFCCC. And with that, Matt, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Niall. That was a really excellent overview of the Ocean and Climate Dialogue. I will also say thank you for keeping bang on time. That was perfect. And I will say to the other speakers, I would ask you, I'm sure you're all going to keep on time anyway, but if anybody does get to the end of their allotted time, I will say, can you please draw it to a close, which is my polite way of saying it's a wrap. So anyway, thank you for that, Niall. I'm now going to go straight to our next speaker, who's going to speak on the governance perspective and fisheries decarbonisation. And our next speaker, I'm delighted to say, is Antonio Basanta Fernandez, who's Director of Fisheries, Aquaculture and Technological Innovation for the Department for the Sea in Junta de Galicia. I hope I've got that right too. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for your words. And first of all, it's an honor to be here because it allows us to share different visions and experiences on this important challenge for our country, for our region, and of course for our sector. When in February the European Union launched this document with a clear objective to be neutral in emissions in 2050, we have to choose that it will be a problem or it could be a solution. There is only a word to define it. It's a challenge. We are the first region in terms of fisheries, shell gathering, aquaculture, and processing industries in the European Union. And there is a special challenge for us. We must to face it with two important challenges just prior to start this path. The first is basis in the, as we named, the hardware. What is the technology that allows us to decarbonize the fleet completely? We have several differences from boats that 100 meters length to small boats that get shellfish in a few meters far from shore. And we need to obtain the technology that allows us to get this objective. We are working with the university, with the Shipyards Association, and with a specific foundation related to marine affairs, just to help us to get the correct path. We couldn't start without this clear objective that's suite to all the types of the fleet. The second part of the path is based on the training, on the software. We are working with the university department on training for maritime people, for seafarers, and they are developing just parallel path to the hardware path, as we name, to get prepared when we can launch this, the starting point of this path. Because this is the theoretical term of the challenge, but we need to start the executive part of this problem, and we must to develop changes on the boats. Of course, we have a limit, that is the sailings capacity of the fishing fleet in the European Union, and then we have must to develop the specific changes on the boats because all the technologies, all the fuels has requirements that we don't that don't allow us to develop it into the actual boats. And we have more or less 100 shipyards, and they must affront the decarbonization of 4,200 boats just from here to 2050. Of course, in terms of management, we have a special commitment in terms of climate change. We are working with the shale gatherers and the aquaculture sector to develop stocks of these species that we are developing, just to be resilient to the changes in terms of climate change, increasing of the temperature of the water, and the decreasing of the biological terms of our estuaries. And in terms of fisheries, there is northern displacement of the stocks that are changing the composition of our fishery print. And we must do management in different order to get a solution to this part of the problem or the challenge. We must to get a realistic and affordable path. We have a strong social link to the region, and we must to affront this challenge with this realistic and affordable path. And taking into account that we are part of the solution, we are part of the problem, of course, but we must to be part of the solution. We are at 0.1, just between to 0.5% of the emissions. We have decreasing the emissions in half a part since 1990, because our fleet is decreasing in steering steps. And our footprint in terms of emissions is among the lowest to obtain protein to human consumption. And we are working, we are joining forces, and of course it's a pleasure to share this meeting with a lot of people that can give us new tools to develop this path, and we hope to obtain the correct way, the correct course to our sector, because this is main part of the shore coastal economic part of our region, and we needed to obtain this correct course just to affront the 2030 objectives of the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I should just remind everybody there will be time for questions at the end, so I'll just keep us moving for now, but thank you very much. I'm now going to pass over to Professor Steve Widdicombe, who is co-chair of the Executive Council for Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, and is also at Plymouth Marine Laboratory. So Steve, I'm going to come and pass you the clicker.
Thank you very much, Matt, and apology for the long list of hats that seem to be made its way onto my first slide here. Anyway, so how can science help ocean-based adaptation and mitigation? Again, another topic that we could probably spend a week on, but I'll try and summarize it quickly here. Okay, ocean science, I think absolutely categorically must be at the heart of all of ocean-based adaptation and mitigation processes. We're well aware science is an incredibly powerful driver in identifying the solutions in the first place. By fundamentally understanding how ocean systems work, by understanding how the activities we undertake change them, will give us an insight into the things we need to do in order to clear up the mess that we're currently making in all sorts of places. So science is fundamentally at the heart of the solutions that we derive for creating better outcomes than we are currently creating. But that's not where science stops. Once we've had what we think is a good idea, that's when science becomes even more important, because we need to understand whether those proposals actually work. Are they scalable? Are they practical? Do they actually have the correct balance between cost and benefit? Many of these processes don't come without a cost, but it's about understanding how that weighs up to the cost of taking action as opposed to the cost of not taking action. And science needs to be at the heart of that conversation. And fundamentally, it becomes a way in which we enable society to make better decisions. And those decisions can actually be not just about what we do, what solutions we implement, but what solutions we don't implement. It's, as I said, reflection on ideas. Ideas are one thing, but reflection on whether that's really a good idea, science needs to help with that. But the good news is the ocean science community is well established. And I think the Ocean Pavilion will give you an indication of just how well connected and how responsive the ocean community can be. One example of that is something that's close to my heart. It's the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network. Around 2012, it was evident to us that in order to address a large global environmental problem like ocean acidification, needed much better coordination between those scientists involved. So GOA-ON was formed in 2012, around 60 scientists from just over a dozen or so countries. 10 years later, it represents over 900 scientists from over 114 countries and territories working together with shared ambition to meet this challenge of ocean acidification. The UN Decade Program, so the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainability came along around 5 years ago and challenged scientists again to think differently. Science is great, but science can't stay in its silo. The Ocean Decade challenged us to think about what was the purpose of our science. So on behalf of the ocean acidification community, GOA-ON created OARS, the Ocean Acidification Research for Sustainability Program, which did something different for scientists. Instead of thinking about the really cool science we wanted to do as the starting point, we thought about what it was we wanted to achieve. What were the ultimate benefits and what were the impacts? And by doing that, we could highlight the pieces of science that we needed to take to drive the appropriate outcomes. Out of that process came 7 key outcomes that we knew as a community we needed to deliver by the end of the Ocean Decade in order to make a demonstrable difference to the issue of ocean acidification. And you will notice that not all of these are embedded totally within the science realm. What was also clear from this process was that in order to deliver the program OARS, the ocean acidification community needed to bring into the family people with many different skills, science communicators, policymakers, decision makers, all sorts of people that would actually contribute to the joint effort in bringing the science and evidence of ocean acidification into policy to underpin change. Then we think about some of the solutions that are starting to evolve in the ocean space. And one area where OARS and GOA-ON is looking to create an impact is in the area of carbon dioxide removal. And this is not a case of us advocating for these solutions. This is us advocating for the use of evidence to judge whether these solutions are A, going to work, or B, whether they are actually going to be worse than the issue we're trying to cure. It is important that we do not let our hearts rule our heads. The imperative to act out of hope must be restricted, and we must act out of evidence. We must use our heads over our hearts. And the way in which the scientific community has stepped up to try and promote the creation of this evidence is there is a best practice just been published on ocean alkalinity enhanced research, because we're conscious that we need to build the evidence base effectively so that decision makers can make decisions based on the truth of science rather than just the expectation and hope that these things might work. So I really welcome the publication of this document and hope it sees a step change in the generation of the evidence needed. So in summary, science can help us understand the complexity and interconnections of the planet. Solutions are never as simple as they first may appear, so let's make sure we don't make mistakes by rushing into oversimplistic solutions to complex problems. Solutions may not come without cost or in terms of financial or environmental, but equally, inaction comes with a cost as well. So how do we weigh up the different costs associated with doing something compared to not doing something? A lot of this will require a global effort, but the great news is science in the ocean is well used to getting together as a global community, and we stand ready to meet that challenge. But equally, partnerships need to go beyond just scientists talking to scientists. And actually, the engagement of decision makers and professional science communicators are going to be critical in the delivery of many of the Ocean Decade programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Heidi, you might not need to put that back up there. So thank you very much. I have been informed that in order to clear a bit more space, we've been asked for 3 speakers to take seats at the front. So if I could very kindly ask, and you look a bit squashed and comfortable anyway, to be honest, if I kindly ask the first 3 speakers if you could maybe find a seat at the front. Thank you, that's great. Right, there we go. Right, while we're just sorting the practicalities out, I will just introduce our next speaker. Thank you very much for that. So our next speaker is Taru Barai, who is a Fisheries Resource Officer for the Fisheries and Aquaculture Division of the FAO. So I'm just going to get the clicker.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Yes, hello everyone. My previous seat was better than this one, but that's fine. I'll adapt.
Sorry, I was being instructed. It's not my decision.
Okay. I don't know if my slides are here. They are. So, given that we're talking solutions, at least this was my understanding when I prepared the presentation. So here we go. Solutions related to aquatic food. In terms of adaptation and mitigation. So sorry for those who were in the room earlier today, but I will reiterate again the fact that there are over 700 million people who faced hunger in 2022, and that the COVID crisis has worsened things, and projections indicate that over 600 million people will still face hunger at the horizon 2030. And I'm saying this because the Food and Agriculture Organization, the organization I work with, has the mandate from the UN to halt hunger and ensure food security. So, sorry, the consumption of fish protein, this is the bar that you see on the in green on this histogram, has the growth rate of fish protein consumption has been increasing twice the rate of the increase of human population. Excuse me. And this is much higher than any other sources of protein, animal, non-animal, plant-based, and so on. So just to give the full picture in terms of food security. When it comes to the aquatic food sector, so all the climate stressors have different impacts on the production, ecology, and biodiversity, on harvest and post-harvest operations, on communities and the livelihoods, and also on wider society and economy. So this translates on the ground into a number of impacts on the species composition, on safety at sea, on loss and damage to assets, on employment, food security, national income, and so on. So there's a number of challenges that are attached to this in terms of fish production, on ecosystem services, and on livelihoods. But there are also some opportunities, in particular new species for fisheries. In some areas we have seen already, and this is documented, that new fisheries have been emerging as a result of these changes in composition and the productivity. For transformative change, because probably this crisis, climate crisis, is the one that the sector needs to have an actual transformation in its practices, and planning and investment, because this is not always the case in the sector. So in terms of solution, the FAO has put together a publication that has been released a few years ago, but that is still extremely relevant, because it includes a chapter that compiles a number of adaptation solutions under a chapter that is referred to as the FAO Adaptation Toolbox, that are grouped into three broad categories. Institutional adaptation, because we have seen that in some cases people on the ground have already adapted to climate change, but institutions and legal frameworks are lagging behind. The second category is the livelihoods adaptation, so really what communities can do on a daily basis to adapt to these changes. And the third category is on risk reduction and resilience, so very much focused on extreme weather events, shocks, and disasters. And the take-home messages of this chapter is that adaptation is place and context-based. You don't have one solution that would fit any context, so this is extremely important. That it is an ongoing and iterative process, because you need to go back continuously to the measures that you're putting in place to see if they're working, if they're not working. And by the way, we still don't have any way of measuring the success of these measures, and I guess this is an emerging area of work. Then in terms of adaptation, whereas the sector is, the aquatic food sector is considered as a minor emitter of greenhouse gases, there's room for reducing the emissions coming from that sector. So in terms of fisheries operation, I'll just give some examples. Like energy efficient vessels and gears. This is quite an active area of work. Low carbon port infrastructure. I think we have heard this with one of the speakers earlier. Utilization of waste. Improved fisheries management. Reformed fuel subsidies. In terms of aquaculture, so this is probably the area where, or the subsector where there is the highest area for reducing emissions, in particular through the feed production. And in terms of post-harvest practices, is mainly on the use of renewable energy and better using the fish products, and ensuring that they are not lost and wasted, as it is the case right now. So I just picked two examples from the FAO Field project, the FAO Field program on adaptation in fisheries and aquaculture, one in the Gambia and one in Timor-Leste. So these are projects that are initiating now. And I just wanted to give some very quick overview of the type of solutions that are envisaged to be implemented on the ground. So for example, in Gambia, it's a lot about infrastructure, about replanting mangroves, and developing aquaculture to compensate for the decrease in fisheries. In Timor-Leste, it's a lot about institutions and legal frameworks and management practices, and also developing adaptive capacity of communities, including through information systems, because this is also a strong need that we have in the sector on early warning systems and how, do you measure or plan for the changes ahead. So again, the Ocean Dialogue that was held and that this was referred to earlier in June has highlighted a number of key messages. So about the need for integrating aquatic food climate solutions in national and multinational processes, the need for using or implementing ecosystem approach to fisheries management, the need for decarbonizing along the entire value chain, and also the need for increasing and scaling up and ensuring stable and accessible finance flows. And I guess that's, I'm looking at my other co-panelists. So an ongoing FAO study has estimated that in order to finance adaptation in the aquatic food sector, we would need like $4 billion per year by 2030, whereas the current financial flow, and I'm closing, is 0.2 billion that has been in average between 2017 and 2021. And I just wanted to close on this because, highlighting this huge gap that hopefully we will fill to be able to really take advantage of the solutions that this sector offers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara, for giving it such a concise overview, despite being on an uncomfortable seat, so thank you for that. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now, who is Gabriella Gilks, who's the Program Manager for Convex Seascape Survey at the Blue Marine Foundation. So, Gabriella, over to you. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? So I just wanted to share some updates from last year on the Convex Seascape Survey, which is a 5-year global data study, open source data, on the role of continental shelf sediments and seascapes. We're 2 years in now, and we are a partnership between the University of Exeter, Blue Marine Foundation and Convex Insurance. But we're now a global consortium of 16 institutions around the world and counting. We're looking for more about that later. And with thanks to the vision particularly of one man, Stephen Catlin at Convex, who has a pedigree of funding these large-scaled ocean climate projects. So why are we doing it? Well, current estimates place the drawdown capabilities of coastal shelf sea sediments at 6% of what's needed to keep within the 1.5 degrees. But really, the data is critically lacking on this, and we're looking to close a knowledge gap. To do that, we have to work at scale. We want to make the data available for everybody to use, and we have to work at pace. We're looking at the whole seascape because this daily drama, these different pumps, daily drama of mud, poo, death, migration, is an incredibly complex, important part of the story. And we're not forgetting that the seabed is not just mud, it's not a lifeless zone, but actually can be rich communities, rich ecosystems, all playing their part in drawing down carbon. So these are some of the questions we're trying to answer to close those knowledge gaps, and we've divided it into a few scientific packages. So very briefly, the nitty-gritty one, where is this carbon, how much is there, where did it come from, and then putting that into the context of global stores. To do that, we start with modelling sea level and tidal forcing from the last Ice Age through to the present day, because that gives an important indication of carbon stores. We are mining existing data. So here you can see the east coast of the US, data that's already available. This is the air-sea carbon dioxide flux, so at different parts of the year, different variables. In blue, it's sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere, that continental shelf, and at other times, it's emitting it back out. So that's quite important to understand. We're mining for data, thousands of data points, and creating these sediment carbon maps, these yellow mud maps. Broadly, that's where the most important organic carbon is found in these different continental shelves around the world. And all of this data will be available for people to use. We're now at a point in our modelling and mapping where we're going out to collect new sediment cores around the world, to refine, to verify, and also fill the knowledge gaps in our models. The second question we're looking at is how vulnerable are these stores to human disturbance? And one of the ways we're doing that is partnering with Daniel Pauly and the Sea Around Us project. He's given us access to 70 years worth of bottom-towed fishing gear data around the world. And that allows us to start to build up a picture, these spatial models of where we're most disturbing the seabed as a species, and we can overlay that then on our maps and our models of where the most important carbon stores are. Thirdly, the role of life and biodiversity on this carbon, because it's the functioning of the ecosystem as a whole, of course, that will determine how much we can store. And to do that, we're trialling 2 field experiments that we then want to roll out to different zones around the world. So both of these we've run on the west coast of Scotland, the Great British Bioturbation-a-thon. We went out, we collected as many creatures as we could to provide replicates, to set up field labs, to take them back and put them in these mesocosm tanks where, with these fluorescing particles, we can start to see how they're moving the carbon and the mud around, both individually and together as an ecosystem. And as you can see here, it's quite a complicated picture. Species that we would never have imagined had much role in this can be quite important, and we're now starting to be able to characterize them functionally in a totally different way to the normal taxonomic groups in relation to carbon. The other experiment we've run is over gradients of disturbance. I mean, this zone in the west coast of Scotland is great. No-take zone through to a bit of dredging and then trawling and dredging. And we can use a range of methods to look at animals in the water column, to fly ROVs over the seabed and look at different communities on the seabed over different gradients of disturbance, and again, collect the in-mud species in the field to see how that relates to the amount of carbon that we're finding over these different gradients. Last and not least, we are looking to bring this stuff to life in as many ways possible, which isn't always easy with the seabed. So we're working with a range of techniques to make it interesting and exciting. We're incredibly proud that we're producing an educational program that's free and available to all, that's a hopeful climate story, Oceans, Climate and Hope, about some of these nature-based solutions. And for the first time, we are bringing the ocean into UK schools' carbon cycle for the first time, which is kind of crazy to think it wasn't there before now. This is a new and rapidly emerging area of science, and there's still so much to do. We're incredibly excited about it. We're looking for other partners, particularly where there are muddy continental shelf sediments, and also over where people have a good range of disturbance where we could roll this out in different parts of the world. And there is funding available for this. So we're hoping that you'll join us on the journey. Thank you for listening, and let me know if you have any questions afterwards.
Thank you, Gabriella. Very, very exciting work. I'm sure we'll have some questions at the end. I'm now going to introduce our next speaker, and who is Catherine Palmer, the Maritime Lead for the Climate Champions. And thank you. Oh, we've got the different slides have come up. It's right. In that case, what we'll do, if it's okay, we'll take Torsten first, and I'll come back to you. Catherine's had to rush over from another, especially as well, so I think it was moved around. So Torsten, sorry to surprise you, but it is always a delight to introduce Torsten Thiel from the Global Ocean Trust, who's going to speak to us on how to mobilize finance for capacity building. Thank you, Torsten.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I should really come last because I think finance is there to service all of these wonderful narratives and efforts that we heard about. And finance succeeds if it can deliver the necessary support to actually put these measures in place so that we can achieve a nature-positive ocean. And so this is a serious challenge, and I think part of the problem has been that the finance narrative is based on certain assumptions that don't necessarily work quite well yet in this ocean context. And so this is really the role of what we're trying to do to bridge these two different worlds. And I was very pleased that Niall gave us this brilliant update of where the ocean climate dialogue is now, because I was moderating the first finance discussions for that dialogue. And so we are getting to a point where the needs are defined in a much clearer way. And I think we heard from Tarab how important the blue food aspect of it is. It's about nature and people, and that's really about nature-based solutions and local communities. And so integrating those two aspects in the finance part is absolutely key, but for finance is probably the more challenging aspect of it. Now, the good news is that the ocean climate space overall is a significant financial opportunity and actually can deliver solutions at a scale that we only now really understand. So we just issued a paper with the Ocean Panel where the scientists amongst us came to a figure of about 35% of the climate challenge can be addressed just by focusing on these ocean-related issues. So ocean is crucial, not just as the center of the global beating heart of our planet, but also in terms of delivering solutions around that. And that's why I'm always delighted to hear from Catherine and from other sectors, such as the offshore wind sector, etc., that already are doing significant contributions in that space, and actually from a finance point of view are probably easier to address. I was involved in one of the first big wind farm financings. This is now a model that can be rolled out. The amounts of money available for that type of investment are very significant. So the finance industry is on board, but the regulatory structures don't exist in all of the right places yet. So we have to work hard that in particular in the Global South, we have the right regulatory environment, the right de-risking environment. I was very pleased this morning in the meeting between the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and Germany, where Germany provides now a guarantee structure to the syndication part, so to the private sector part of these financings that the EBRD does in emerging markets. We need more models like that, and we can bring them in this ocean space. Which leads me to the constructivist part of ocean finance, the part I find exciting, because the way we can create new innovations and structures is when we address these real challenges, when we can figure out how we bring upfront money into spaces where it can be deployed at scale and effectively. And when I started out my career in the financial world, infrastructure, project finance was still really only a thing done by multilateral financial institutions. It's now an asset class. And it's that transition that we need to work on. We need to get the institutional investors, the large asset owners, on board with the space we are talking about. Because it's a domino system. I can do an impact fund. I can do an early stage blue bond structure. But it's really only when I have a long-term owner of these assets, a holder, that the whole system works. And the good news is that if you ask me what asset class I would want to hold in the long term, it's definitely nature, because that is a long-term regenerative asset, and we just need to make sure that, and we wrote this up as blue asset companies as examples for that, that we create a regenerative blue economy. So blue finance and the sustainable blue economy needs to move from a sectoral focus, which is where we are making progress, where we are saying, look, we know how to finance in particular sectors, to thinking about it as an ecosystem. And that ecosystem that is working together in a regenerative way. And that's why the scientific part of this presentation is so important, because we are working at the moment with lag times. We are trying to improve the way interactions with nature works through disclosure frameworks. That's really, for me, an intermediary step, because what we want to is have almost real-time information at the hand of the financial players as well as the governments about what are the right choices to make. And that's why this work on carbon flux, for instance, is so interesting. The panel I spoke on earlier today was on intertidal mudflats. Another area that is about sediments is not yet in the methodology, but it's clearly on the way towards it, because it's just part of how that coastal ecosystem works. The mangroves and the seagrasses and the mudflats and the salt marsh all interact. And they all provide us with very significant ecosystem services. So I speak to young people coming into the finance world, and this is the area they're excited about. It's about sustainable finance, and it will be about blue finance. And it's very interesting to see that the recent blue belt that Ørsted did is focusing on biodiversity outcomes and on the change in the shipping. It's not the green part about building more offshore wind, it's about the implications of that industry for its blue marine space. So I think we're at a really interesting part of the journey. We need to take all these aspects fully on board, but there is an emerging, growing ocean investment case, and I think it'll be the most exciting investment case for this decade. Thank you.
Thank you, Torsten, for reminding us of the importance of finance as your passion route. And what we're going to try and do now, depending on fantastic. We're going to stick with the financial sector. So our next speaker will now be Laurence Pezet, who's Global Head of Corporate Social Responsibility at BNP Paribas Foundation. And the talk given will be Opportunities for the Financial Sector to Scale Up Innovations for a Sustainable Ocean and Develop the Blue Economy. Thank you, Laurence.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for having me. So after the brilliant presentation of Torsten, I will give you a practical example of what a bank as BNP Paribas, which is a leading bank in Europe, can do to contribute protecting the ocean, or at least financing all ocean-related activities in a responsible manner. So as a bank, we finance all kinds of sectors of activities, and some of our corporate clients rely for their activities on the safeguard of the ocean, but others can have activities which could potentially negatively impact the ocean. So the idea for us is to do two things: to do sound risk management, making sure that we don't indirectly contribute to worsening the situation, and on the other hand, proactively contribute to protecting the ocean. So we use, of course, our core business activities, so financing and investment. So you mentioned the example of offshore wind. So the world needs more renewable capacities, but of course it can have a negative impact on biodiversity. So as a bank, we don't finance any offshore project with a sound biodiversity impact assessment. So it's what we are asking from our clients. Second example, the shipping industry. So of course we finance the shipping industry, which is critical to the economic development. And we are a member of the Poseidon Principles, which means that we measure CO2 emissions related to the fleet we finance. And we committed 1 billion euros by 2025 to the ecological transition of the fleet. When we finance fisheries, we ask them to comply with the highest standard of the industry. And for example, the retail sector, which still uses a lot of plastic, plastic is the first waste we can find in the ocean. We structure some financing that we call sustainability linked, which means that our clients will have a better financing conditions if they commit to KPIs of less use of plastic. And talking about plastic, by the way, we stopped financing the tobacco manufacturers back in 2017. So of course, we didn't take this decision for ocean-related reasons, but for human rights reasons. But the consequence is we don't contribute to cigarette butts being found on the shores. And you may know that cigarette butts is the first source of waste you can find in the sea and on seashores. So on the positive side, so proactively contribute, we use our investment vehicles, which means that we can create funds invested in positive activities for the ocean when our retail customers or institutional investors can put money, so channel funds to the protection of the ocean. We can also finance startups, innovative startups with solutions also to mitigate the negative impact on the ocean. And we also do corporate philanthropy because, of course, some projects are innovative, they are first of the kind, they are not bankable from the start. So we provide some kind of seed money for projects such as coastal restoration, mangrove protection, coral reef regeneration, or these kind of things. And last but not least, we also fund the fundamental research on climate and biodiversity. We started this program back in 2010 in order to better understand the impact, what's going on climate, ocean, how can we better understand and come up with solutions. And so far we have financed 35 research projects, and it's interesting to mention that 13 of them were directly focused on the ocean. So that's, in a nutshell, what we can do as a bank to contribute.
That's great. Thank you very much. And once again, for keeping on time. This is great. It's having some question time at the end, which I'm sure you will all have. Could I just ask for the... Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to have Catherine, but I don't think your slides have come up. That's what I was asking for the clicker. So what I'm going to do, I've got your slides here, so you've got a copy of them anyway. They are there, fantastic. In that case, that's perfect. Oh, sigh of relief there. Right, in that case, I've already introduced Catherine once, but I will introduce her again anyway before I pass her the clicker. So Catherine Palmer, who's Maritime Lead for Climate Champions, and thank you for rushing over to be with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and apologies for the late arrival. I was coming from the other end of the site. So, yeah, thank you for this opportunity. And so for those of you who don't know who the Climate Champions are, we work in support of the UN High-Level Climate Change Champions for COP27 and COP28. And I said I am the Maritime Lead for them. And so our work is really about mobilizing climate action in the real economy and bringing that to the UN climate change negotiations. So, some of you may know that a couple of months ago, under the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action on Ocean and Coastal Zones, we launched a set of ocean pathways that are there to drive the transition towards a net zero world and anchor the ocean in the climate and biodiversity negotiations. And they're what is known as the ocean breakthroughs. And they really set out tipping points that need to be reached by 2030 to achieve a healthy, vibrant, productive ocean in 2050 and an equitable and sustainable ocean economy. One of which is ocean-based transport, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. And so the fact that decarbonising shipping is one of those climate solutions, and shipping sits in that intersection between nature, oceans, and climate. And so by really focusing and driving action and investment into shipping's decarbonisation, it does have those wider co-benefits for the ocean and society. So by 2030, zero emission fuels need to make up at least 5% while striving for 10% of international shipping's energy demand. We also need to retrain and upskill about 450,000 seafarers. And we also need to ensure that global trade is moving through climate adapting ports. Because we've all experienced disruption to supply chains, knowing that 80% of trade is carried by ocean transport. So, and only 30% of shipping emissions are domestic, and therefore there's relevance under the scope of the Paris Agreement and the NDCs. And what I'd like to say is that, you know, the IMO this year adopted the 2023 Greenhouse Gas Revised Strategy. And what that does is put shipping on a pathway of about 1.6 degrees. But the fact that shipping consumes about 250 million tonnes of oil per annum, in just 15 years' time, by 2040, the IMO's target of 70 to 80% absolute emissions reduction means that we need to replace that volume of oil with renewable energy-derived fuels. So if we can move on to the next slide. What we can do is we can really focus then on where this system transformation needs to take place and look at all the different levers that are available to the maritime sector for this transition. And our work in the Climate Champions focuses on that system transformation from 5 different levers. We look at policy, demand, technology and supply, finance, and civil society. And it's not just one lever that is going to be able to solve this problem. It's the interconnectedness and the dependencies across these different levers. And so as we look how transitions take place on these S-curves, we can say that, you know, shipping is in the emerging phase of its transition at the moment. So it's this gentle uptick to 2030 where we're starting to prove concepts, see first mover opportunities. We've got pilots and demonstrations, and I'd like to say there's one sitting down in Dubai Harbour Marina as Fortescue have their green ammonia fueled ship here for COP28. And so we can really focus on showing these so that by 2030 we can reach this 5 to 10% uptick of zero emission fuels that can then rapidly scale through to 2040, achieving a zero emissions by 2050. And so by focusing on these different levers across this transition, you know, we can start to see real action taking place. And so we set out these near-term indicators of what is actually needed, because by bringing those numbers back into the kind of business real-world economy of kind of saying what is actually needed. So when we work with corporates and when we work with companies and financiers, technology providers, shipping companies, green energy supply companies, we can actually start to anchor what is actually needed in terms of much more business planning focus, as opposed to just always looking at the 2050 and thinking, well, that's a long way away. What does that type of action need to be taken today? So I think the final slide really looks at the type of action and the signals of change that we're actually seeing. So what we do is we track the progress on an annual basis, and so we can really start to say, how are we doing against that 2030 breakthrough, and where do we need to really focus and spend more of our effort? And so we're seeing signals of change. A lot has happened very, very quickly, I would say, in a short period of time in the maritime sector. My first COP as the Climate Champions was COP 26. And I would even say this now, how shipping has now become much more integral to these negotiations than it ever was. Very much the fact that its interconnectedness across communities, society, trade, energy, oceans, it makes it such a great source of solution to the climate crisis. So the kinds of action that we've seen just in the last 12 years, we've got many more countries submitting national action plans to the IMO, and more countries are actually starting to reference 1.5 within those from shipping's perspective. Even though there's still only 5% of the total of the IMO member states, it is increasing as time goes by. We've seen 41 governments have now formulated their national hydrogen strategies that actually include user cases, the end user, the demand use. And shipping is a significant demand sector for green hydrogen. And so by including the demand sector into national hydrogen strategies, we can really leverage both the supply and demand policies together rather than looking at them in isolation. And we've also seen clear commitments across governments to really support that end use, and particularly the opportunities in Global South. Whereas on the industry side, we've seen a lot of corporate action taking place. And so we're up to probably the order book at the moment is around 200 zero-emission capable vessels have now been ordered. But again, it still only represents around 20% of what is needed by 2030. But that does go to show that ship owners are now sort of placing those orders and sending that demand signal to suppliers. We've seen strong market demand signals from further down the supply chain when we look at shipping customers. So the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, which is a corporate retail companies like IKEA, Patagonia, Tsubo, have really come together. They've aggregated their demand for ocean freight and really they've put out that request for services, and they're going through a process of going to appoint a tender to procure zero-emission ocean freight starting in 2025. So that is showing that the market is willing to pay for zero-emission ocean freight. And so when we look at these signals across the supply chain, we can start to see that them to drive action to be able to advance projects and commitment into turning into action and delivery. And we've also seen a rapid growth in the production and supply of green hydrogen, and the pipeline is now around 47 million tonnes by 2030, and shipping actually only needs 5.5 million tonnes by 2030, so there's more than enough for shipping to achieve the minimum of 5%. And so now we're in this period of turning these commitments into action and delivery, and turning these projects from sort of front-end engineering design projects into financial investment decisions. And that's where Torsten and Lawrence on my right here can really, we can work together with the finance community to really advance these solutions in the maritime sector, which ultimately have benefit both in the ocean, nature, and community resilience angles as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. And just seeing all the ambition and action across all the sectors, but also the way you all sort of naturally interact. I think we've assembled a bit of a dream team here to move things forward. So who knows what we can achieve afterwards. But thank you very much, and for keeping to time again. Our final speaker, who I'm very much hoping will appear online behind me, couldn't join us in person. Probably just as well because we didn't have enough chairs, but he didn't know that. So hopefully he will appear behind me shortly. We're talking in the context here of the UNFCCC, but one of the things, and this is the title of the next talk, is the integration of ocean climate biodiversity actions across not just the UNFCCC, but also the CBD and the BBNJ. And for that, we've invited Jeff Ardren from the Commonwealth Secretariat. And as I said, hopefully, fantastic. So Jeff, we're very pleased to have you with us. Whenever you're ready, I'll hand over to you, and I believe you're going to share your presentation with us. Is that correct?
Hi, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can all hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes, I've shared my presentation with the tech team, so it should go up on screen when it's ready. Now, there's might be a bit of an echo, but...
Okay, just there appeared.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm sorry that I cannot be there in person. Today's talk, I'm going to step back a bit from the really exciting work that all the other presenters have presented and talk about how this fits in from a government perspective, how governments are seeing this, and how we can better integrate across the multilateral environmental agreements that are currently in place. My name is Jeff Ardren, and yes, I work for the Commonwealth Secretariat leading the Commonwealth Blue Charter. So we know that the ambition is high. The expectations are high for this COP28, and we will see where the negotiations go. But we know that after this COP, there's still the hard question of implementation, which is regardless of what targets are agreed to and so on and so forth, somehow they have to be implemented. Also, we know that the ocean covers most of the planet. Here's a simple graphic by the World Economic Forum just showing surface area, but it's sometimes easy to forget that the biggest emitters in the globe cover a very small percentage of the surface of the planet. And if you look at the biosphere, the living space of the planet, the ocean is at least 95%. So the fact that it wasn't until just a few COPs ago that the ocean was even recognized as having a place is astounding in a way. But at least we're making progress and we're able to move forward. As you know, every country has to submit in the stocktake this year their NDCs and the national adaptation plans. And we have had a look at these in terms of the ocean being included. And it's broken down in this report, which is available. And Heidi Krislin is in the audience, I believe, and Heidi and members of our team there in Dubai can share it with you. We look at 6 different things, mainly 5 things. The first 5, blue carbon, protection of marine ecosystems, shipping, renewable energy, and then in square brackets here, tourism, coastal tourism, because actually tourism is not right now reported in the NDCs, but we think it should be. It's part of the solution or problem, depending on how you wish to see the issue. So let's look at some of those initial results from this examination of countries' NDCs to see what role the ocean plays right now. Okay, so these graphs, don't be frightened by the graphs. Each clustering just shows one of those themes that I just told you about, and then the different colored bars represent different regions and across the Commonwealth. So for instance, in the left clustering, under blue carbon, the Caribbean 77% of the NDCs submitted mentioned blue carbon, and we're doing something about that. So Caribbean, Commonwealth countries, and there are a lot of Commonwealth countries in the Caribbean. Likewise, for Asia and Africa, protection of critical habitats and ecosystems was mentioned in their NDCs. In the Pacific, it was maritime transport, a very high number. Moving across to second from the right, we have infrastructure, climate resilient towns and cities, a big deal in Africa, especially. And then the far right, ocean-based renewable energy was not mentioned much at all, but where it was mentioned was in Europe and to a lesser extent, Asia and Singapore. So what we see here is that different things are important in different regions, if we could generalize, but that no one region or no one topic is of equal importance or equal level of reporting across regions. So if I had to summarize this in words, most countries are undertaking a lot of things, but they're different things in different places, as I just said, but also most countries we know are undertaking significant actions that they did not report upon, which is a little bit odd, but we know that in most of the countries, they were not reporting on everything that they had done. So that's something to think about. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. The small and developing states have led in general. They are reporting on more ocean activities than any other grouping. We can also single out Fiji, Kiribati, and Bangladesh as leading on blue carbon type issues around the mangroves. And Europe is most interested in renewable energy, it seems, though, as I say, the amount is still fairly low. All right, so that's the NDCs. If we jump to the Convention on Biological Diversity, as most of you know, almost a year ago, in December last year, the Global Biodiversity Framework was, after a lot of negotiation, passed. And there are a number of different targets there, more than 20 of them. Some of them directly overlap with the UNFCCC. Target 8 is about climate change. Target 19 is about financial resourcing. Target 20, capacity building and tech transfer. 21 is data and information. 22 is the rights and justice of peoples, indigenous peoples, locals, communities, women, youth, and so forth. Also, if you look at what's called the BBNJ agreement, not yet in force, again, we find these overlaps in yellow. Marine protected areas, environmental impact assessments, capacity building, tech transfer. I also mentioned marine genetic resources, which may not have a direct implication here in the UNFCCC, but it overlaps with the CBD Nagoya Protocol, the FAO Plant Treaty, and CITES, just to name a few. I'm not the first person to have noticed this. Elsler et al. Have published this paper that actually look at the biodiversity focus and the climate focus of different agreements using keyword searches. I'm not going to go through these results in detail, but just to point out that every agreement they looked at had some climate and some biodiversity focus. CITES is mostly about biodiversity. The London Convention and Protocol has a lot on climate. The Fish Stocks Agreement, a lot on biodiversity. UNFCCC, a lot on climate. But the point is, they all have a little bit of each in them. And to keep them separate, like, oh, the CBD is only for biodiversity and UNFCCC is only for climate change, is a false distinction. We also looked at the SDGs, the UN SDGs, across our action groups in the Blue Charter. And again, different SDGs apply to different places. There is no one SDG or one framework. The Blue Charter Project Incubator, this is a blatant plug for something that we launched at the last COP, is trying to help fill these gaps by funding climate biodiversity projects. And we have a separate announcement on that coming up on the Ocean Day at UNFCCC. I won't spoil it, but just to say that we in the Commonwealth Secretariat are trying to address some of these issues. Okay, so this is the last slide of my presentation. What have I tried to say? I've tried to say that climate mitigation and especially adaptation must include other agreements, other targets, other multilateral environmental agreements must be included. This can no longer just be a UNFCCC thing. And the overlaps of climate and biodiversity agreements are numerous. There is no unifying framework. I wish there was, not even the SDGs. The SDGs do not unify. However, and also, as we presented earlier, the NDCs and the NAPs do not currently capture everything that countries are doing. They seem to have been sort of choosy about reporting in their NDCs. But in the future, the next stock take, yes, I'm talking about the next stock take, we would hope that the NDCs and NAPs could offer the opportunity to form a creating overarching framework that would better integrate the approaches across agreements, but also would allow for leveraged funding. The Green Climate Fund, for example, could be used to fund more activities carried across the country if they're reported as part of the NDCs or NAPs. So we think that this is a way of creating funding efficiencies, but also just tying the left, right, and all the other hands of the octopus together. That's me. Thank you so much for your time. And I will stop sharing my screen now, if that's okay with the tech people, so that we can go into the panel.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and thank you for being willing to stay on and answer questions. So yeah, thank you very much to all the panel for keeping to time. That does mean we just have a few minutes for questions from the floor. It's been a very rich discussion, so what I would ask, if you have any questions, if you'd just like to raise your hand and either just ask a general question, and then we can put that to the panel, or if it's to a particular panelist, say. Also a reminder, I don't think I'm allowed to invite people back. I got in trouble the first time, so a reminder that we have Niall and Antonio and Steve, who are also part of the panel and can answer questions there. So thank you. Could we take questions? And I can see one at the back there. If you'd like to just briefly say who you are and then speak loudly, thank you.
So I probably don't need this. So my name's Gavin Allwright. I'm the Secretary General of the International Windship Association. I'd just like to ask, especially around the finance issues. So Catherine, you did a fantastic job showing what's happening around the fuel development within shipping. But we actually deliver energy directly to the ships. We're also looking at energy efficiency and also voyage optimization in shipping. Now, the problem is those do not attract finance. They simply don't. They attract interest, but we're actually going to need probably around about 25% of the target for decarbonisation by 2030 is going to have to come from those, so about 70% of the total. But it's not attracting finance. We tend to be siloing off impacts and saying, this is green finance, this is other finance. Really, we need to be flipping that around and saying, this is finance and this is dirty or dangerous finance. So I'm just wondering, how do we actually change that perception within finance, especially, where we actually get, for example, the Poseidon principles that you mentioned talks about greenhouse gases, but not other impacts. So I'm just wondering, how do we get that complete mindset change to get us into the 2030s and 2040s? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Torsten, you want to take this on? Thank you.
I love that question because it's a really concrete answer to what I was explaining about the ecosystem-based positive ocean action type financing. So we have had the Cartagena action agenda for multilateral development banks to exactly address this point. So the challenge is coming from that sectoral approach. You need to bring that together, and one of the ways to bring that together is use the emerging ocean data infrastructure to actually help that type of optimization and see the benefits of it. So Jeff referred to the BBNJ Treaty. What does the BBNJ Treaty do? It allows us in the high seas to have large marine protected areas. What does a large marine protective area require? It needs a form of use that is more appropriate for whatever the issues in that area are. I would argue that wind-driven shipping is probably one of the most sustainable ways of even using a marine protected area. So you could have pricing differentials there. You could use the satellite data infrastructure to optimize the routing, etc. So I think we can find finance solutions for exactly what you're talking about. I have looked at multiple wind shipping type of efforts because I think it's an amazing technological innovation that is aligned with this nature positive approach. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Torsten. Did anybody? Yeah, Lawrence.
Maybe I can add a few words. As I was saying, we're committed to financing the ecological transition of the fleet, and I'm sorry to say that for the time being, the only bankable things we see is moving from heavy oil to LNG, which is a very first step. So I think what you were mentioning wind sail, it's still considered as innovative, and it requires to mobilize different kind of money. And I think that's where blended finance appears as the best tool, not to say the silver bullet, because you can mobilize grant, public money, private money, you can bonds and all kind of things. But for us, we don't see any of this in our pipe currently.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists want to step in on this question? If not, I'll take another question from the floor. Okay. Right, somebody down at the front here. If you'd like to introduce yourself briefly, thank you.
Hi, Rachel Delez from Convex Insurance. Torsten, I'm interested in asking you about, we've heard various ways of sustainable marine financing that could be enabled. And actually, I think it's really, despite this really frustrating, the lack of growth finance that there appears to be, not just in that great example of wind-driven shipping, but other examples of transition-related financing. So I think that's something the finance sector needs to really resolve. But my question is, to what extent do you think there is an appetite for biodiversity credits, ocean-related biodiversity credits, and do you think, can you see that scaling?
When we started to look at the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility as a way to identify specific projects, we didn't call it blue carbon on purpose, because we were aware that the resilience components of these ecosystems, the biodiversity component of these ecosystems, the adaptation and the ability for livelihoods means that as a package, it has significant value. So the debate, the live debate we're having at the moment is really, do we create biodiversity credits as a separate asset class in parallel, or do we work with improving the blue carbon approach to mature into what I call blue natural capital asset class? And I think the value is clearly there, and for the investor, it's much more straightforward if you have a high-quality credit that provides you with these multiple benefits. And that's, I think, both what is needed from the investor side, that clarity, but it also takes the reality of that coastal ecosystem much more into account. It delivers such a multitude of services, and therefore creates that value and entry point. The EPA in America today announced that their latest assessment of the social cost of carbon is $190. That is without really looking at all these additional co-benefits. So we are talking about a very valuable asset class. We need to build the data around it. And since you come from the insurance industry, I think it addresses the previous question as well. For me, insurance is one of the ways to actually deliver price points which then allow the investment. When we looked at from the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance at how do we get financial flows into these coastal communities, the realization was that over 80% of them have no access to any type of insurance products. And without an insurance, we don't have a price point. And by including price points around the natural asset class, we're really delivering that opportunity. And that is why I'm quite confident that we will get these additional flows. And the innovation that then comes around that is really helpful to allow investors to come in.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to step in from the panel on that question? I'm going to have to, in that case, I'm going to see if there's one final question. We might have... sorry, a question over here. So bring the microphone so you can just say who you are quickly. Thank you, Tekla. Okay.
Hello, I'm Rishita. I'm a youth delegate representing India and the UK. I had a question for Gabriella regarding the convex seascape survey. So is there a way for the convex seascape survey to track the impact that the findings have on the relevant policy amendments or replacements done by the UK and around?
That's a really good question. What we're trying to do within the 5 years of the study is focus on data, on the right data, and then making that available, putting it on Harvard Dataverse so that people can access that as easily as possible as we start to publish, which we are now, some of our findings. I think wearing my hat as Blue Marine Foundation, as we come to a sort of close on the data collection exercise, what we really want to do is drive policy in those spaces and track where we're going as we get to understand these processes a bit more within this zone, within the continental shelves that we're looking at. But one of the stipulations of the funding coming from an insurance company was that data is king. We focus on that first, and then we take it as an NGO and we create advocacy. But I think tracking, it's a really hot moment for looking at bottom-towed fishing gear, both as Torsten was talking about, with the multiple sort of effects that it has, but particularly looking now at emissions from that, which we've only really understood fairly recently. And to me, personally, it seems like quite, it's a measure, it's something we do that could be managed quite easily. So I think we're going to see the dialogue on that increase exponentially over the next months and years.
That's great. Thank you. We could probably take one question if it's, it would have to be a really quick answer as well, literally 1 minute. So we'll take one final question from the front here. And maybe if you just stand up and there we go. And whoever it's directed to will have to give you a very brief answer and then we'll close. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm from Tony Cabri from Kiel University. And I'm trying to connect the dot here. I could connect what we heard about finance and all this mitigation, reducing carbon from shipping, and I would like to connect it to the presentation from the FAO and how the finance could play a role in the issue that were presented from the FAO, for example, the food security and all this, the amount of money that was needed, because there we cannot generate, I'm not sure we can generate carbon credit from that. So how do you, is it just public grants? How do you mobilize this climate finance for food security and more adaptation policies?
Thank you. I am going to ask for an incredibly brief answer. Apologies to terrible Torsten for both of you, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm talking under the scrutiny of the finance person here on my right. But basically, yeah, in the examples I mentioned, it is grants that are allocated to the countries to support, on the ground activities. Some examples of which I have talked about in my presentation. You want to add?
Farming will be one of the fastest growth areas, and it is entirely investable. The moment we're just scaling how to bring that investment in.
That's great. Thank you for very good and brief answers. Right, it's coming to a close now. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. I'd just like to say a few thank yous. So thank you to all the tech people who've been great today, the tech support. Thank you very much. And thank you to all our panelists, including Jeff, for joining us online. Much appreciated. And thank you for staying and engaging in this discussion. So we will now draw this to a close and enjoy the rest of your COP. Thank you. Just to join us for a quick photo, very quick photo. What's that, sorry? Oh, behind the TV screen so we can include Jeff.